This episode of the podcast is brought to you by New Bloom Labs.
Let's face it, guys. When it comes to testing, most producers are frustrated with their third-party labs. It's one of the biggest, most frustrating bottlenecks in our industry. It's simply unacceptable to wait 1 to 2 weeks or even longer for a full panel analysis of your cannabis products. That's why you need to know the team at New Bloom Labs. These guys are the real deal. With locations in Tennessee and Texas and more to come soon, New Bloom provides precise, accurate analysis and the best turnaround time in the industry. They always provide next business day turnaround on potency tests and 1 to 2 day business turnaround on most toxin screenings. They're ISO certified and DEA registered, so you know their science is first rate. Again, you don't have to be frustrated with your third-party labs. Call New Bloom Labs at 844-TEST-CBD or visit their website at newbloomlabs.com. Superior science, rapid results, New Bloom Labs. Hello, everyone. Kevin Carrillo here, and welcome to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast. My guest today is Daniel Abrahami, co-founder and CEO at Headquarters. What's up, Daniel? How are you?
Not bad. How about yourself?
Same, man. I'm just trying to wrap up this week. It's been a busy one with recording shows, but that's a good problem to have. I've been learning a lot this week, so can't complain either.
Always good to be busy.
That's right. And I know when we started recording, before we started recording, you mentioned that you picked the short straw today, so you were able to stay home and not pick up the kiddos. So again, congratulations on that. And where are you based?
I'm in Irvine, California, just south of LA.
Got you. Okay. So lots going on there, and it's good that you guys are able to work from home and continue to do what you're doing out of your house. So
We're the lucky ones.
Absolutely, man. Well, hey, for those listening, as I mentioned, I have Daniel Abrahami on the line here, and he's the co-founder and CEO at Headquarters, which is a strategic advisory collective focused on helping cannabis entrepreneurs unlock accelerated growth in California's multi-billion-dollar industry. So, Daniel, before we get into Headquarters, let's first talk about the current state of the cannabis industry. Right. So there's obviously been a lot of positive momentum after the recent election with the 5 states passing. I mean, we've seen more public support than ever. So somebody entering into this industry and wanting to start a cannabis business, like, what are the earning potentials? What are the risks associated? What's the competition look like? Let's break all that down.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think everybody kind of knows already, cannabis is a once in a lifetime opportunity. It's kind of this generational opportunity that doesn't happen often. You know, we've seen it, you know, we've learned about these different moments in history, you know, in school and everything. And, you know, this is one of those moments that is going to be in the history books. You know, a brand new industry that is born essentially overnight, going from this traditional market to this legal market. Granted, it's only some states, but we're definitely getting there. And it's this international kind of global commodity that is going to be traded, you know, across borders and shipped across from country to country. That now is the time to really, you know, get your feet wet, learn about the industry, and get in. You know, the earning potentials we've seen, you know, they're saying in the US, $24 billion market. You know, California right now is an $8 billion market when you include the traditional market and the legal market. And so, you know, California specifically, where my main focus is, you know, right now we have a $3 billion legal market with a total of an $8 billion market. There's a $5 billion delta there. That's the opportunity to take advantage of. And you're really, you know, when you're getting into a market this early, my first mistake was trying to go too big, trying to do everything at once. But the main thing is understanding where you want to play and play that game extremely well, and then grow from there.
Right.
And that's where we're going to start to see success.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that example up, and admitting kind of that was one of your first major learnings to kind of get where you're at today. And I'm sure that, Mark Zuckerberg wasn't thinking of including a marketplace in Facebook when he launched in Harvard, right? It's like you said, you kind of focus on one core competency, you develop that, and then over time you can kind of add different ancillary services or products to that core competency.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think we kind of live in this day and age where we like idolize these big entrepreneurs and CEOs and everything. So we feel like we need to get to that place that they got to right off the start. But we always forget that, like, uh, revenue and success is a lagging indicator, right? That was that. Then that, the saying goes that overnight success took 15 years. My start, I started off more just helping friends that were in the industry in the traditional market in California, not plant touching. I helped with strategy here, some financial modeling, some accounting kind of things, trying to help them stay compliant as best as it could back then. But my day job was with the family business. So I did have this focus. And then when the traditional market turned into this legal market in California, I was like, oh, we got to take this by the reins and take over. But that's where you start making mistakes, because you can't be the first one entering this regulated market and trying to be this big thing, because that's where all the mistakes are made.
Right. Or you'll become the example, right?
Yeah, you're the example. You're the, look at what's happening in Canada. It's like everybody tried to be these big things, and now you got them shutting down, 100,000 square foot greenhouses because they went too big too soon. So, I from my perspective, and how, when we're helping brands get into the market, that's kind of the first thing, is we're just learning from our mistakes and trying to help these new founders and new brands prevent themselves from making those mistakes. And that result, you have success actually come much faster.
And managing their expectations, right? Like you said, this, while it is, we're at the forefront of the industry, success, just like in anything you do, doesn't happen overnight, right? And I think that there's been studies or very successful people that have said it, at a minimum 10 years, right? I mean, you mentioned 15 years you've been at it. So it takes a while to so to speak, put your stake in the ground and really be a leader, a pioneer in an industry that's just beginning.
While yes, this is the one of the biggest opportunities of our lifetime, at the same time, it is probably one of the hardest industries to navigate. You're going from this industry that has been operating underground for 30 years, and it's transitioning to this legal market where things are just kind of a mess, and you're kind of figuring things out as you go. And some things are still staying traditional, some things are going to legal. And specifically in California, while it's an $8 billion market, it's a very small community.
Right.
And so you're constantly, you're having to build those relationships, and navigate those relationships at the same time. And it's setting expectations is the perfect example for this. I mean, it's not going to happen overnight, and it takes a lot of work.
Right. But it's also exciting, right? Because in a way, the cannabis industry is positioned where it could kind of rewrite how some traditional operations have been carried out, right? And in addition to that, even the way the culture, the company culture is, or the industry culture. I've worked in big corporations, and it's a machine. You're moving fast, you're a number, everyone's replaceable. There's kind of that mentality of, don't toe the line because I don't want to lose my job, or I don't want to be on bad terms. And so I think in a lot of ways, operationally, culturally, cannabis can really start to change the way things have been done, and in a positive way.
Oh yeah. I mean, well, for the first part of things is, the legal industry is righting a lot of wrongs that have been done. That's kind of like the priority right now, is fixing those. And then, everything else that happens from that, we're definitely moving the industry in the right direction. A lot of people, especially in the traditional space, we're against, all these regulations and everything. But in the end, it's healthier for the industry, because when you have these specific regulations, and especially on the cultivation side. Now you have products that are grown, better, healthier for the consumer. Now you have this big trend in California of flower grown from living soil. So, no fertilizer or anything. It's through the soil, through the worms, through the bugs, natural, organic. And so when you have that, these regulations put in place, it pushes us in the right direction where now we can thrive and we could show the naysayers that this is a real industry, that we're not doing harm, that we, quite frankly, in a time during COVID, are one of the industries that's contributing to taxes more than any other industry, not getting $1 of loans from the federal government or state governments, and we're still thriving and surviving. I mean, that is a resilient industry. That's what excites me.
We found our soundbite for the episode right there, because you're exactly right. I mean, what other industry really kind of stepped up and showed its leadership and what it has, right? Then during COVID with the cannabis industry. I mean, everything from how they handle operations, from curbside pickup to contactless delivery to like you said, those are the other examples that you gave. It's incredible what the industry is doing, and I'm just excited to be a part of it.
Yeah, yeah, and I left a nice job, working in the family business, making more money than I do right now, because right now there's more meaning, right? I really want to see the industry succeed. When I launched headquarters, the reason why we launched it was because we wanted to build a bridge into California and to unlock innovation, unlock the growth, the potential growth that we've all been talking about in the industry. And one of the things that happened with legalization, unfortunately, were it created extremely high barriers to entry. So as if I wanted to start a brand, or if I had some interesting technology, or if I was a doctor that had some recipe that I put together that I wanted to bring to market, it's extremely hard for me to do that. And I spent 3 years going back and forth in Israel, meeting with professors, meeting with doctors, meeting with the labs that were doing interesting things. And they all expressed to me they want to come into market. They want to come to the US. They want to be in California specifically, but there's no clear way for them to do it, or it's too expensive, too time consuming. And so that's what really got me going. I was like, we need to bring this to California, to the US, to show that cannabis is not just some recreational product that high schoolers are smoking. This is yes, it's recreational. I've been that was my first experience with it, but you start to learn about the medicinal values, and you see the impacts it's having on people's lives. Like my grandparents who smoked it while they were going through chemo and all these other things. You start to see that and you say, okay, how do we open up the market? How do we bring this to more people and show them that this is not the devil's lettuce? And so in order to kind of unlock that, we had to bring down those barriers to entry.
Mm-hmm.
We had to make it easy. We had to make it efficient. And I kind of compare it to a lot of what we're seeing in technology. 20 years ago, when, if you remember maybe it was less than 20, 15 years ago, the Palm Pilot, that the first kind of version of the iPad, it barely worked, right? It never caught on because the infrastructure, the technology just wasn't there to support it. We didn't have 3G, we didn't have 5G, all that. So now, what we're trying to do is build that foundation for these brands, to give them the chance of success, to come in cheaper, to come in more efficiently. And hopefully, if we're successful, we'll open up the market to new consumers, we'll open up the market to new brands to succeed.
Right. Well, let's dive into that. So at the beginning of the podcast, you mentioned, how this is one of the, if not the most regulated industry, right, out there today. So let's talk about the cannabis regulatory landscape. Everything from, the challenges when it comes to cannabis taxation, license and permitting, banking and finance, and how headquarters helps kind of solve those issues.
Yeah. So I can only talk mostly towards the California regulations. I'm not familiar with all the other states, but in California, this applies to most of the states. One, we got to deal with 280E, which is the federal tax code, which, you know, as most people know in the industry, we just can't make the standard deductions that we would in any other business.
Which is crazy, right? So for those listening, 280, right, which it's basically inhibits, like you said, tax deductions in the cannabis industry. So everything from employees, contract workers, everything, those are not tax write-offs at the end of the year.
Yeah, so you can deduct cost of goods essentially, but you can't deduct marketing, rent, you can't deduct, you know, utilities, all those things. So you're really left with this massive bill, and you know that's, you know, so that's the first kind of headache right there. The second is banking. You know, majority of the industry is being run by, you know, through cash, and no one wants to accept cash, and that's just, you know, it starts to become a massive headache. And with banking now, you have some banks coming up, but they're, you know, they to work with them, it's, I got to pay you 3% of my deposits, you know, and that's just, you're just getting taxed in multiple ways. And then you have the regulations, and you know, the regulations themselves, you know, on cultivators are extremely stringent. I mean, some of them for good reason, some of them, you know, kind of overkill. You know, we have stricter laws and regulations on the cultivation of cannabis than we do on the cultivation of tomatoes. You know,
And what are those more stricter guidelines when it comes to cultivators that you mentioned? Like what are they?
so the types of, you know, fertilizers or whatever you use, pesticides that you're able to use, when we're testing the products, so you can only have a certain amount of, you know, heavy metals or whatever it may be inside there, and those levels are much lower than they allow for tomatoes or other vegetables, quite frankly. So you know, you have this problem of, this is why a lot of some cultivators still operate in the traditional market, because it's like, man, you know, I barely missed the mark. What am I going to do? Burn $100,000 worth of inventory? You know, I'm just going to move it. So that's where we start to run into these issues. And then on the licensing side, in California, you know, the state passed this, you know, groundbreaking new law legalizing cannabis, but they left it up to the cities to decide if they want to allow cannabis activities. Mm-hmm. So right now we only have just over a third of cities allowing cannabis activities in California.
Which makes it difficult for transportation, right?
Well, not necessarily. It does make, there is some, you know, some issues with transportation. Like, you know, some cities are saying, okay, we won't allow cannabis activity, but if you drive through us, you got to pay a tax. Or if you deliver to somebody in our city, you got to pay this tax. But what it does do is that it just limits the areas that you're allowed to operate in. So you have 2/3 of California that won't allow you to operate. So as a company that's saying, okay, I need to go get a license and find real estate to do all this, it's extremely limited. And it prevents, you know, a small mom and pop shop from opening up in their local town because they won't allow any cannabis activity.
Right. That is so surprising to me. I've heard that echoed before on the podcast where, like you said, less than or just a third of California municipalities allow for adult use, right, and retail. And I mean, if you look from the outside, I'm from Texas, right? California, to me, it's a blue state. You would think that they voted statewide, but these cities aren't ready for it. I mean, that's just crazy to me.
Yeah, it's, you know, a lot of them wanted to sit on the sidelines and see how things pan out, you know, but and a lot of them still have these kind of misconceptions of what cannabis is, and they think, oh, you know, if we allow cannabis activity, it's going to bring crime, it's going to do this, it's going to do that, and you know,
no, it's going to build better schools and better parks and, you know,
more tax revenue. Was that, I mean, you know, you have more money to spend on these other things, and you know, it's like total opposite of the reaction to when alcohol came out of prohibition, right? When alcohol came out of prohibition, they were like, okay, 0% tax, we're gonna, you know, accelerate this industry, incubate this industry. And with cannabis, it's even the cities that say yes to cannabis activity, they're like, well, let's tax the hell out of it. You know, we have licenses in the city in down here in Southern California, and you know, when we first acquired the licenses, the city tax before any other taxes was 6% on our gross revenue. Whatever comes in, 6%. there's no way a business can operate. So, we had to work, and for a year we had to convince them, and they finally lowered it to 1%. But it took time. And there's a lot of cities that are like that, 6 to even 10% on gross. It's wild to me.
It's so crazy, man. But hey, it's that one word you use, and it's so true. It's the industry is so resilient, right? Despite all those hurdles and obstacles and challenges, I mean, the passion for the plant and the understanding of how it can benefit from an economic and medicinal standpoint, it just thrives. That's what pushes people through. Um, and I think about like the CBD side of it, right? I know you're hyper focused on California and the THC market, but like it's a mosh pit, it's a free for all on the CBD side because of the lack of FDA consumer oversight and regulation, right? So you've got a lot of bad actors, you got a lot of low quality products that contain little to no CBD, maybe even contain harmful chemicals, and it's just like all the kind of the good actors are kind of being pushed and boxed out in a way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, don't get me started on the CBD market. I mean, that's been kind of one of the failures of government right now, is to not try to regulate CBD in a better way. That is what's gonna, all the good work we're doing, that's what's going to undermine it, because you're going to have, CBD is like that first step for new consumers. They say, okay, oh, I won't get high. Okay, let me try CBD. They try it. They might try a couple products. Nothing happens. They don't feel anything, or they get a week later they see, oh, this product didn't actually have CBD in it, or whatever it may be. Now we just lost them as a potential new consumer.
Yeah, it's a detractor. I 100% agree. It's doing more harm than good for sure, and it just shows these people that are doing that. It's a money grab. They're not in for the long haul, you know.
Oh, not at all. Not at all. I mean, the amount of companies that I've come across that are just looking for the quick, like, oh, let's just, CBD and let's throw it in shampoo or whatever. It's like, come on, this is not the use case for it. This is what is going to undermine this entire industry. And that's what we're hoping to prevent. But, it doesn't look like that's going to be changing anytime soon.
Right, right. Well, not until the FDA steps in and, and starts to, either list CBD as a dietary supplement or do some type of regulation. Because, as I said before, it's the Wild West. I mean, as we all know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, even I will admit, even on the legal side, it seems like the Wild West sometimes. We're still figuring it out as we go, and
Yeah.
that's why headquarters becomes so valuable. I mean, how we set it up is where the brands that we work with are technically not plant touching, so they're able to deduct their expenses. They're essentially acting as marketing companies more than anything. And the amount of money you spend on lawyers and navigating the industry is burdensome. I mean, it can be kind of the make or break, and especially on the supply chain side, when brands, when you get into market and you gain traction, a lot of the times, time after time, I've heard this story where brands are forced to go out and finish, or they're supposed to pause all operations because their entire supply chain broke down from under them. They didn't partner with the right people, or their supply chain, their provider went out of business, or their license got shut down, whatever it may be, and now they're just kind of hanging high and dry, not sure what to do. And so that's where we want to really help these companies kind of accelerate, incubate themselves in California until they're ready to kind of go off on their own, right? They're standing on four legs, they're ready to run. But until then, it's hard to navigate it, because it's the wild, wild west out here.
And that's a much needed service that y'all provide. I mean, not only in general, just for like traditional business, like starting a business and managing a business perspective, but the fact that the cannabis industry is so complex due to its, regulations and whatnot. And so, it's great that y'all are doing that. And so, what are some common, frequently asked questions regarding clients or customers that you work with that want to start a cannabis business?
Well, the first question always is like, what products do we start with? And really, when it comes to that, we how we've designed headquarters, and specifically the launch pad, we start with this, what we call the first phase, which is ideation. And that phase is we talk to the brand and we say, okay, who are you targeting? Why are you targeting? You know, what is your angle? What is your reason for going after this consumer? And we start to look at the data of, okay, you know, not just the who, what, why, when of the consumer, but you know, where they live, what they're consuming, what their passions are, and then from there we look at the overall market and say, okay, these are the products that they're consuming at these price points based off the consumer you described. And then we're able to, from there, that feeds into everything else. So then from there, we start to develop their go-to-market strategies. And from there, that's the next question is, okay, how do I actually sell this product? And in California, there's only, if you include delivery, about 1,000 retailers, 1,000 dispensaries, right? To take away the delivery, and you have about 800 dispensaries, physical storefront dispensaries. Those are your two only avenues. Those are your two only channels to sell. So 1,000 stores, let's say 800 physical stores, in a market that is worth $8 billion, and you have as many people as we do in California, is nowhere near the amount of stores we need. I mean, the magic number is about 3,000 stores is what we're aiming for. So we're about a third of the way there. And within those 800 stores, you really, you know, only need to be in 200 to 300 of those stores, you know, in terms of market saturation and have that coverage. You know, the goal is to be ubiquitous. You want it to be in every major market so that if someone looks for you, you're near there.
Right.
And so, you know, when they say, okay, you know, we have the product now, how are we going to sell it? We have a managed sales team that come from decades of experience in the cannabis industry, who have been buyers for dispensaries, managers for dispensaries, you name it, we have right now about a book of business, about 250 stores, and they have those deep relationships with the owners, with the buyers. And that is where commerce gets done. It doesn't get done. We don't need to go around knocking, sitting in a lobby saying, hey, look at this product. It's about having that relationship with the buyer, and the owners know that this sales rep has quality products, and that it's a phone call away. Hey, new brand coming through. This is who they're targeting. This is why it fits your dispensary. We're not just going after every single dispensary. We're saying our consumer lives within a 10-mile radius of you. This is why they need to be in your store. And so we go through that process when we're developing the go-to-market strategy. And then that last phase that we take them through is really on the piloting, right? Let's start small, 5 stores. Let's get the reactions. Let's understand the buyer's feedback. Let's understand the consumer's feedback. And not only the consumer's feedback when we're in store saying, how do you like our packaging? But when they take the product home, follow up with them, understand when they're consuming the product, why they're consuming the product, understand where they're storing the product. Because all those start to make a difference. When you start to understand how your consumer is actually using the product. I constantly refer to Clayton Christensen. He's you know, innovator in the tech space. He always refers to something called the job to be done. What is the product's job, what is it solving? And when you understand how the consumer is really using your product, that's when you say, okay, I understand now I need to make those changes, and I need to now scale it. And that's what, you know, we want to get to proof of concept as quickly and cheaply as possible for these brands. And that's how we go about it.
Well, that go-to-market strategy and that process it's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's data driven, right? You're providing data insights that informs their target market and the competition in that market. And then also through the whole process where you have those relationships with the buyers, the retail shops, to buy the product. And that's the key, right? And like you said, it's a lot easier to make those connections if you already have the relationship, as opposed to doing cold calls, cold emails, knocking on doors. And so that kind of cuts through a lot of that time and effort. So in addition to that customer profile that you mentioned, like the person wanting to, say, either start their own brand or white label, you know, products, do you work with like customers on the dispensary side or in any other segments of the cannabis market in California?
Yeah, so I mean, we try to provide an entire ecosystem for these companies to thrive. So in terms of bringing a brand to market, um, you need to have the supply chain intact. So if you're a flower brand, you need to have the relationships with the cultivators, which we've established. You need to have the distribution intact, and then you need to have the sales team and the relationships with the dispensaries. So where we've seen time and time again that brands have failed is when the supply chain fails on that, right? I've literally firsthand seen a brand come to market, sell out in 2 months, and the cultivator decided that they're not gonna sell anymore, that they're doing something different, they're starting their own brands. So they didn't have access to flower anymore, and right away the dispensary said, well, we can't hold the shelf space for you, we're going somewhere else, unfortunately. And now that brand is not coming back into market.
And in that situation, is that just the lack of no contracts in place, or that not being like definitive in writing that, if in fact they want to pivot or change, like, they have a heads up or any type of litigation in that way?
It's a mixture of both. There really is no contractual recourse in right now in cannabis. If you were to set up a contract with more of an agreement with the cultivator, it's more of like a first right of refusal to purchase the product. They don't have any obligation to actually sell it to you. And a lot of the time you may show up and say, okay, per our agreement, I had an agreement to purchase 100 pounds for $800 a pound. And the cultivator will say, well, actually I can get 1,000 for it. So if you want it, you can have it, but it's for 1,000 now. And that just throws off your entire unit economics, and it just won't work for your specific brand then. So you're constantly kind of dealing with these little issues, and that's a headache for small brands. That's not the headache you need in the beginning. You need to know that you have a secured supply chain, a reliable supply chain that's going to come through, and that when you sell out of that first 100 pounds, you're going to now have another 100 pounds to re-up on. And that's what we've been working for the last year to really solidify that. And on some points, we've gone out and actually are doing it ourselves. So, on the distribution end, we're now about a month away from opening up our own distribution hub in Southern California, because we wanted to take control over the fact that, when we get an order, we don't want the retailer to wait 2 weeks for the product to get to the store. Because if a brand sells something, the retailer is going to get upset if they have to wait 2 weeks for the product to actually get in there. So, our goal is order comes in within 2 days, the product is in those stores. And by having more of that control, we're able to, provide security for these brands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I agree. The supply chain is so key. And I've seen that even evident on the hemp side, right? Texas being in its first grow season for hemp, and in my home state where I grew up, New Mexico, these farmers had the challenge of selling their crops, right? I mean, everybody was so excited about the 2018 Farm Bill. These states submitted their plans that were approved by the USDA, and then as these farmers started going and started farming and growing these crops, they didn't have these agreements in place. They didn't have buyers at the end, right?
Yeah, that's that, and that it goes both ways. For some cultivators, especially in again in California, you had a lot of cultivators up north that are wanting to go into the legal market. They want to make that transition, and they're making that transition. One, it's really hard, and then once they do make that transition, they don't even know where to sell their product legally. They're just like, okay, what now? And so it definitely goes both ways. And so we've more recently started to make those relationships happen up north with these kind of newer cultivators that are coming into the legal market, to help them have an avenue to move their product into the legal market to help supply our brands.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little. Let's move further back, like with the magnifying glass, and let's look at a global scale, right? So this was a big week. The United Nations, they had the vote for the single convention of cannabis being listed, or the removal of the scheduling of cannabis within the single convention of the WHO Act.
Yeah.
And it passed. There was support for it, right? So like on a global scale, what can the US, like what countries can the US look to in terms of like best practices when it comes to the cannabis industry? I know that Israel is doing a lot in terms of their research and development and human testing and whatnot. And so what do you think about Israel or maybe other countries?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of regulatory environment, I don't think any country has really done a great job. I mean, maybe you know maybe some European countries have done had a good medical rollout, but you know um, I think if we look at Israel 100% dropped the ball on legalization because it's taken so long. They've been medical for 30 plus years, doing an amazing job at studying the plant, learning from the plant, developing products from the plant. They're sitting on mounds of data. Their medical program wasn't like California. California, when I turned 18, I just went to Venice Beach, and went to a doctor on the boardwalk, and I said, I can't sleep, and I got a medical card. And I was able to shop anywhere. In Israel, it's true medical, right? I think at their peak, it was like 30,000 patients up until last year, and now it's been accelerating. But they had 30,000 patients. It's all done through the hospitals, and the hospitals are working with the universities. And so when you have the amount of data they have, they're able to now develop IP, develop products that can really make a dent in the pharmaceutical side. And I think the US should definitely look at that, because the US is a unique position. One, we can be an agricultural center for cannabis. I mean, just like we are in many other industries. But two, we can definitely be the R&D center of cannabis. And that is where Canada messed up. They tried to turn it into this cash crop for them that they're going to be exporting, but they're going to lose to Colombia. They're going to lose to all these other countries that can produce it for much cheaper. Where Canada should have focused is really on the product development. And I think the US should definitely look at that and start opening up more to the product development and the research, because I think that's where we can definitely accelerate, where we can 100% kind of dominate in that industry. But unfortunately, we're kind of in this pickle where we're also dominated by the pharmaceutical industry, which if they have their say, they're not going to let it be that easy.
Right. Yeah, that's going to be a whole fight in itself. Outside of the federal government is the pharmaceutical industry. um, well, and I want to go back when you talked about the example of Israel. Like, so at this point, because I've had doctors on the podcast, and they've talked about kind of the cannabis being the future of medicine, in that we can start to really focus on the certain cannabinoids that are found in the plant, and then dial them in for certain ailments or things that we need in terms of healing or therapeutic properties, right? And so are you saying at this point that Israel is that advanced with their cannabis, so within their pharmaceutical market, if I wanted to sleep and if I have high anxiety, I could get a product that is dialed in with cannabinoids to that level?
So Israel's not there yet, but they have the data to influence those formulations. So, they've been breaking down and isolating those cannabinoids for quite some time. And I've been in discussions with companies in Israel that are specifically working towards what you're saying. So kind of gearing it towards this recipe of, okay, we need some THC, we need some THCV here. THCV is kind of what I think might be the next one to come out in kind of how CBD did. And so they start looking at these minor cannabinoids where they can formulate products to solve specific indications, like you're saying. And I do think that will kind of be the future. I look at cannabis in two directions. One is, the recreational, kind of more holistic wellness side of things. But on the second side of things, it's definitely more medical. And you will have this scenario where the cannabinoids are more ingredients to a product, right? That are paired with other ingredients that we see in our everyday life, that will have an effect on that product in the end. So that's what really got me excited in the beginning, was like, wow, that's some cutting edge stuff, to see that they can isolate these minor cannabinoids, and leverage those to solve specific indications, that's exciting.
For sure, yeah. And I would add one more component to the cannabis plant in one more area, and that would be the industrial hemp side. I mean, we haven't even started there. And,
Yeah.
and everything that can be made, right? Cars, hempcrete for houses, textiles, clothing, biofuel. I mean, it goes on and on. There's no waste of the plant, you know?
True. That's 100%. And I always forget about that one. And I there's people around me that always remind me, like, don't forget about that. And it's completely true. I mean, we haven't seen it like take off, like it hasn't gotten as much publicity as these other parts and these other opportunities. But we know China's doing a lot with hemp. We know they're working a lot. There's a lot of textiles there mills that are working with it now. So we'll see what happens. Like I know I had a conversation with somebody that they're out in Boston and they're doing this whole they're building this whole R&D facility for hempcrete and trying to work on how they can really bring it to market. And I think that's what's in the end it's all exciting because cannabis as a plant is like this multi-use thing that we don't see often. I mean, it's pretty wild.
It is wild. It's so exciting. Yeah. And I want to go back to one other point, and you talked about data and how data is informing Israel in their kind of approach to the future of medicine utilizing cannabis. And so we know that data is like the new oil of today, right? Data is so important when it comes to large tech companies and what they're doing with it, or any type of company, right? So why is data so important and king when it comes to the cannabis industry specifically?
Well, I look at it in two perspectives. So the first one, in terms of the medical side of things, the data will help inform governments, will help inform regulations on and regulatory agencies on why this plant is so important. So for using Israel as an example, 30 years of collecting data through seeing how the plant has affected patients, how it solved specific indications, and they're able to take that and show governments, listen, this is not a drug. This is a plant that will solve problems. That's one use case. The second, on the formulation and on the pharmaceutical side and actually creating products, you can't get anywhere without the data. You need to understand how the cannabinoids and the minor cannabinoids are able to affect the body, how they're able to affect the patient, what happens. So with that, when you're sitting on that amount of data in a time where we can't openly research cannabis in the US and openly research cannabis in other countries, even in places where it's medically legal, it's really hard to do research. So when you're able to see that data, you're able to start creating products that reflect, what that data was trying to tell you. So, that's where, we talk about sleep aid, when we talk about any other indication that you're trying to solve, pain medication, all that, the data collected by these organizations and labs will able to influence that. And then on the third side, which we utilize more in headquarters, is on the consumer side. We kind of take this data approach to launching brands, and it sounds so cliche and so like, okay, you're just using buzzwords, but it's extremely true. I mean, what we've done is we partnered with the Statement Group, which is led by Corey Jones, and what they brought to the table was this very unique data set that analyzes social media actions. So it analyzes, let's say you have a brand and you have followers, you have 20,000 followers. It analyzes those 20,000 followers and what they do socially. So what they like, what they comment on, who they follow, and when they comment across different platforms, so Instagram, Twitter, you name it. When they comment, it looks at the language analysis and it looks at whether it's positive or negative. So what we're able to start doing is start to build this kind of affinity that the consumer has. And so, if I go and download data from, I won't name any data sources, but if I download a report on their consumer demographics and they tell me, okay, this consumer is 24 years old, female, makes 75,000 a year, lives here, that doesn't tell me much, right? It tells me the bare basics. But if I take two of those identical consumers and start to say, okay, what are their interests? What are their passions? Who influences them? It's gonna be two different people. One might be into heavy metal and one might be into classical music. And so I'm not gonna advertise the same way I would to those people. So we use this data to influence, who the consumers that we're targeting, how our brand messaging is going to be, how it's going to look, who we're going to target when it comes to, potential influencers or platforms or engagements. And then that goes into, okay, where are we actually going to sell this product? Where do these consumers, where are the pockets of these consumers in California where they live, so we can target those dispensaries. And it all feeds into how we launch those brands. And I think it's extremely important because using data correctly leads to less wasted money spent, quicker feedback loops, and more efficiency.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, again, it's great what headquarters is doing, and it's a much needed service in this industry, especially as the industry is so new, as we've talked about before. Everything from your go-to-market strategy approach to the data insights that you provide your customers, and the launch, right, of these brands and the connections that you can help them get with potential wholesale buyers and retail stores. So, Daniel, I really appreciate your time today and all the insights that you've shared. Where can people find your website and social media channels if they wanted to learn more?
So our site is cannhq.com, cannhq.com. You can follow us on Twitter at We Are Your HQ, and we're pretty active on LinkedIn. Me personally, Daniel Abrahami, and we have our headquarters page on LinkedIn as well.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, I want to have you back on real soon. I enjoyed talking with you, and we'll run it back when these things develop in this industry.
Definitely. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Awesome, and thank you all for listening. Bye.